One of the questions I've often got asked or seen a lot is how much JavaScript do I need to know before I start learning React? And some people would even ask, do I need to learn JavaScript completely before I jump into React? Well, JavaScript has a lot of features, and if you are waiting to know all these features before moving into React, you probably never get started with React. However, there are some fundamental concepts of JavaScript that you need to know to help your journey and experience in React. And that is the purpose of this video, where I'm going to be showing you 9 fundamental concepts you need to know using examples. Let's start with higher order functions and callback functions. These are very popular concepts in JavaScript, which you would use a lot in React as well as any other framework. Now in JavaScript, you have higher order functions. Let's say we have a function here called execute. A higher order function can be either of two things. It is either a function that returns another function, or it is a function that takes another function as an argument. Let's quickly look at some examples. Let's say this function returns another function, console.log I am Deeecode. This is a higher order function because it returns this function. And we can see an example of how to use it. So if I do result and I call execute, by calling execute, this is going to return this function to this variable, which means I can then execute the return function like this. And if I run this, I am Deeecode coming from this function that was returned to this. But another instance of a higher order function, like I said, is a function that accepts another function as an argument. So let's say we have another function called execute2, and this accepts a parameter we'll call func. And now execute2 can execute func like this since it is a function. And let's see how to use it. I can say execute2, and then as an argument to execute2, I can pass a function. What this function is just going to do is welcome. Now if I come here and I run this, we get welcome because we pass this function to execute2, and then execute2 executes the function. And we can even save this outside. So I can put this outside here. I call this function something, and then I can pass this something to execute2, and if I run this, I still get welcome. And then what about callback functions? Well, a callback function is the function that you pass as an argument to another function. So in this case here, execute2 is a higher order function because it receives a function as an argument. But in this case here, where we are passing something to execute2 and something is a function, well, something here is the callback function. Like I said, it is a function that you pass as an argument to another function. You'll be using higher order functions and callback functions a lot in React. For example, you would see something like this where you have a use effect function, and in this function you can pass a callback function. Don't worry so much about what exactly use effect does, just know it's something related to React. Use effect is a higher order function, and then you would pass this callback function to use effect, and then you can do some things here, and then this use effect as a higher order function can execute your function later on, just the way execute2 executes this function later on. Another fundamental concept is arrow functions and anonymous functions. Now with your regular functions in JavaScript, you can have function print name, and you have name, and you can say console.log name. But then you also have arrow functions introduced in ES6, and the syntax is slightly different. So with arrow functions, you have your parentheses for your parameters, then you have the arrow, and then you have the function block here. And this is an expression which you can return to a variable. So we can say const print name is equal to this, and then we can pass our parameter name here, console.log name here. Now this will do the same thing that this would do. In fact, let's look at examples. I'll call this print name 1, I'll call this print name 2, print name 1, Deeecode, print name 2, Deeecode. If I run this, well, we get Deeecode from the regular function, and we get Deeecode from the arrow function. And if you'd love to know what the differences are between regular functions and arrow functions apart from the syntax, I have a separate video where I went into more detail on that. I'll leave a link in the video description. So what about anonymous functions? Well, in JavaScript, your functions can have names. For example, this one has a name of print name 1, and this arrow function by itself, it doesn't have any name, but by assigning it to this variable, we can access this function using print name 2. But anonymous functions are functions that do not have names. For example, if we go back to this use effect here where we talked about callback functions, You can see that this function here doesn't have any name. We just use the function keyword, the parenthesis, and then we have this block. Well, this here is an anonymous function. For arrow functions, it will also look like this, so we can still have use effect. Here we're supposed to pass a callback function, right? And then we can just pass an arrow function, and this is an anonymous function. So in React, there are a lot of times where your functions do not need to have names, and in those cases you can just use an anonymous function. In fact, something you would see is, let's say we're creating a component in React. Now don't worry if you don't really understand what components are in React, but you can think of a React component as something that returns something like your HTML. So in your HTML you can have div, you can have h1 and stuff like that. I should give this a better name, components A. Don't worry too much about the React specific terms I'm using in this video, but what I want to show you is, again, anonymous function. So now here we can have a button, and let's say when you click this button you want to do something, you want to execute some code. You can choose to have a function here which you call when button is clicked, and then you can pass this when button is clicked to this button here. So you can say on click, and then you pass when button is clicked. Now in this case you have a named function, but if you don't want to have a named function, you can also do button on click, and then here you can just pass your arrow function anonymous, and then here you run your code, or you can pass your regular function but still anonymous. But like I said, don't worry about the React specific things, just keep the concept of arrow functions and anonymous functions in your mind. Another fundamental concept to look at is object and array destructuring. This feature gives you a smoother experience with object and arrays, and in the React world you're going to be using this a lot. So let's say you have an object, we call this obj, name Deeecode, age 6. Now if you wanted to get this name field and this age field, you could do something like this: constant name, and then you do obj.name, and you do obj.age. Now of course this works, but this is how object destructuring makes your life even easier. You have your const or let, whatever variable keyword you want to use, and then you have obj. Now by having something like this, you can now destructure what properties you are interested in, or you can think of it as extracting. So here I can extract name and I can extract age. This simple line here is doing exactly what we have here. This is going to extract name and assign it to a name variable, which is going to be a constant since we're using const, and we'll also extract age and it will assign it to the age variable. And now I can do console.log name age. If I run this, name is Deeecode, age is 6, and if for example you wanted to rename name to something else, you can have a colon and say I want to extract the name property, but I want to assign it to a variable called hello. You have to do console.log hello age, and if you run this, you see again we have Deeecode and 6. Let me give you an example of a React component. Let's say you have a component, and this component accepts some properties which we're going to name props as the parameter. When you want to use component A in the React world, you would use component A like this, and then you would pass whatever props you want to pass to component A. So you can pass maybe a label prop which says hello, you can pass an onClick prop, you can pass an anonymous function again, and let's just pass one more prop of ID, and ID is 100, and you can access those props here. Now one way you may want to access those props is to do something like label equals props.label, onClick is equals to props.onClick, ID is equals to props.ID. And although this works, you have 3 lines for this. I mean, your life could be easier, don't you think? So with object destructuring, what you can simply do is you have your const or your lets, and you have your props. Now what do you want to extract? I want to extract the label, I want to extract the onClick, and I want to extract the ID. And by this you have done everything that you're supposed to do here. And to even make this one step easier, which is something you would see a lot when learning React, you can destructure it from here. Instead of having your props parameter and then destructuring it here, you can destructure it directly here. You already know that the first argument that's going to be passed to component A is props, so you can destructure that argument. Now what do you want to destructure? Same thing, label, onClick, and ID. And then it comes to array destructuring, it's quite similar. With array array destructuring, you might have an array like this, array2, and this would have orange, apple, cashew. Now, if you wanted to get the first item in this array, you could say item 1, and you have array2 with the 0 index. You can have item 2 with the 1 index, item 3 with the index of 2. You can make your life easier with array destructuring. Similar to the object, you have your const, then you have your square bracket, because square bracket is for array, and then you have your array2. This way, you can select all of these items and assign them to whatever variables you want. So for the first item, you can call this item 1. Item 1 is going to point to the first item in the array because this is based on order. You have item 2, which will point to this, and you have item 3, which would point to this. And now if we should do console.log item 1, item 2, item 3, and I run this, you see you have orange, apple, cashew. In React, you would also see array destructuring used in a couple of places. One example I can think of the top of my head is a function that returns an array, something like this. And how you would see people use this function is they would say const, you have your array, you want to destructure the array that comes from executing return something, and then you can give this item 1. If you want to skip an item here, you can just have another comma like this, and then you go to the third item and you can call this hello. I know I use hello a lot. Then you can say console log item 1 hello, and if I should run this, you have orange for item 1 and you have cashew for the last item that we destructured here. We also need to look at the rest and spread operator. Let's say you have an object obj name Deeecode, you know how it goes, language, JavaScript. I need to comment all this other stuff from here. Now let's say you wanted to copy this object to obj2. Well, if you do obj2 equals obj, anything you do to obj2 is going to affect obj. If you'd like to understand why that happens in JavaScript, I have a video for that. I'll link it in the video description. So how can you safely copy obj to obj2? Well, there are a lot of ways you can do this. You can use the object constructor and all that, but a simpler way is also using the spread operator. So by having this like this and then having 3 dots, 1, 2, 3, and then having obj, what you're saying is I want the properties in obj into this object, and this way if you modify obj2, it's no longer going to affect obj. And what about the rest operator? Well, the rest operator can be used hand in hand with object destructuring. Let's say you want to destructure obj name, and then you can use the rest operator, which is just like the remaining properties in obj, I want to assign them to a variable called remaining. Again, here you extracted name, and then you take the remaining, the rest of the object, and assign it to renaming. And if I come here now and I do console log remaining, I was saying renaming. If I do this, you can see that remaining has age 50, language, JavaScript, which is the other properties that you didn't destructure. And you can think of it also with an array. With spread operator, you can say array2, you have your open and close square bracket, and you can spread r. And with the rest operator, you can also use array destructuring, and then you can get the first item, we call this item 1, and then you can use the rest operator 1, 2, 3 and say remaining. If you come here and do console log remaining and we run this, you're going to see remaining is going to be the remaining, the rest of the other properties that we didn't destructure. Rest and spread operator is something you're going to be seeing a lot in React, especially when you want to copy certain objects or copy certain arrays. Another fundamental concept is the conditional operator. Let's say you have a variable called is raining false. If you wanted to execute certain code based on the value of is raining, you can use your if else. So you can say if is raining, we're going to return get an umbrella, but if it is not raining, wear whatever you want. But we can reduce this number of lines by using conditional operator. And the syntax for the conditional operator is you have your condition, you have your question mark, your expression 1, which you are going to return if the condition is true, and if the condition is false, you have your expression 2. Your condition here is going to be is raining. If it's raining, expression 1 is going to be get an umbrella, and expression 2 is going to be wear whatever you want. And now we can assign this to a variable called what should I do. So now if I should do console.log what should I do, if I run this, it says wear whatever you want because this is false. But if I change this to true and I run this, well, it says get an umbrella. You're going to be using this a lot too with React. Let's say you have a component, and in that component maybe you have a variable called has paid is equals to true. You may want to do something like if this user has paid, return return div span ordered, else return div and then you return a button that says buy now. And one thing you notice here is we're repeating ourselves. So we have div and we have div, and the only thing that is changing is this span and this button. Or this is where we can use a conditional operator like this. So we're going to say return, and then you have the div, and then in this div you can now use the conditional operator. If the user has paid, you have your question mark, and then here you're going to return a span that says ordered. But if the user has not paid, then you're going to return a button that says buy now. And this is how you have improved this if else with some repetitions to this using the conditional operator. It's also worth noting that in some cases the conditional operator might make your code a bit hard to read. So sometimes you might want to stick with if else like this, but if it is something simple that won't affect readability, you probably have a much more nicer code if you're using the conditional operator. Before moving to React, another fundamental concept is statements and expressions. Statements and expressions are concepts in JavaScript that might be confusing sometimes, but I'm going to help you in this video. A statement, you can think of it like an instruction. You have your if statement, loop statement, different statements where you are creating some instructions like do this, do that. And then you also have expressions, which you can think of as a piece of code that returns a value. An expression can be one returns one, a string like this returns this, the execution of a function. This case we're executing execute, and by doing this is going to return a value which you can assign to maybe a variable like result. So in this case, this is an expression. Everything here is a statement because this is an instruction that says execute this and return it to this variable. 1 + 1 is expression. 5 × 5 is expression. All of this here is an expression that evaluates to a value. Now the reason why this is important before jumping into React is, let's say you create a component. In this component you can return div h1 heading. Now what if you want to insert or interpolate a variable into this component? Let's say up here you have a variable called name Deeecode, and then you want to say something like my name is. Well, with React you can insert expressions using curly brackets like this, and this curly bracket would only accept an expression. So in this case you can pass an expression of name, which is a variable expression that returns a value, which is going to return Deeecode. You can also pass an expression like execute, which is going to return a value, and that value will be added here. But for example, you cannot do something like if something return something else return something. In this case this will not work because between these curly brackets you can only pass an expression. So if you want to do some if stuff, this is where you can use the conditional operator too, because that is an expression. So here you can say condition return exp1 or return exp2. So it's important to understand the difference between statements and expressions, because coming into the React world there are certain rules or syntaxes that works with expressions, and when you pass statements there can throw an error. Another fundamental concept is array methods. You probably use a lot of array methods in JavaScript, but also coming to the React world you're going to be using a lot of that. Now you have a lot of array methods. The ones I want to talk more about is map and filter. You also have reduce, pop, for each. You have all those stuff, but let's just stick with map and filter. Now as you probably already know with the array map, it allows you to map through an array and generate a new array from it. So let's say we have an array here which has 1, 2, 3, and we want to generate a new array from this array where all the items are multiplied by 2. Here you can have array2, array, and then you have map. Now in this map you're going to pass again a callback function, which is a function that the map method is going to execute. Remember callback functions from earlier. So here we can pass a callback function. You can either use a regular function like this, or you can use an arrow function. I'm going to have a parameter called item. This map function is going to pass each of the items into this function, and here I can say return item times 2. And now if I do console log array2 and I run this, oh, we have get an umbrella from let me comment all of this part so that we are not confused. All right, let's give this a second run. Well, we have 2, 4, 6. 2 is 1 times 2, 4 is 2 times 2, 6 is 3 times 2. And then you also have array filter, and array filter is similar to map, but in array filter, you would return true or false. For the values you return true, they will be included in the new generated array. For the values you return false, they will not be included. So for example, if I should say if item is equal to 2, return false, and then for the other items return true. Now if I do console log array2, oh no, sorry, this should be filter. I was confused why. So if we run this now, you see we have 1 and 3, because with this filter we filtered this array. So for 1 we return true and for 3 we return true, and that is why we have this here. You'll be using this tool a lot in React components where you want to loop through certain data and filter what you want to render. Remember when we looked at statement and expressions, I told you that you can only insert expressions, right? So in this case, you can also insert an array map. You can insert something here where you have array.map, you have your item, you can return a p tag, and then you can also insert again the item. Array.map here is an expression that returns a value. That is why you can insert it here. But also in the callback function you pass to array.map, you can also return this again, which in this case you insert this variable, which is also an expression. Another fundamental concept in JavaScript is modules, where you use import and export. Now when you're working on small applications, you can put everything in just one JavaScript file. But if you have large applications, if you put everything in one JavaScript file, well, you'll be having maybe 2,000 lines of code. Managing that JavaScript file would be hard as time goes on. And this is where modules comes in. Modules allows you to kind of split your code into different files, and then one file can use something in another file and vice versa. Now let's say we had this function called print name. Now from test.js, we can access this function in test2.js. Test2.js in this case is a module. The reason why I can use this as a module is because in my package.json, I have a type of module, which is for my Node.js environment. If you're using a browser environment, you have to set that differently. How do I access print name from test.js? Well, first off, I have to define what I want to expose from this module. So in this case, I can say export function print name, which means expose print name to be used by other modules. And now in test.js, I can import from test2.js. And what do I want to import? Print name. And now I can use print name like this, print name Deeecode. And if I run this, we get my name is Deeecode. And the module can export multiple functions. Let's export a function called sum, which takes num1 and num2. Instead of console.log, let's say return. Here I can also import it. Sum const result is equals to sum 10 and 50, and then I can do console log result. And if I run this, you get 60. This module is using the sum function from this other module. And the reason why this is important in the React world is that you would not declare all your components in one file. You would have one file, button component, another file, table component, another file, header component, layout component. But then when a layout component needs a button component, it can easily import that button component from the module. Another fundamental concept to look at is the fetch API or async await. In your JavaScript, you have the fetch API, which allows you to make different network requests to servers, get requests, post requests, whatever. You can see an example here where you have fetch. In this fetch, you have a URL. Then if this promise resolves, you have your then response, return response JSON. If that also resolves, you can now get your JSON. And if I should run this, well, this is the JSON. You can also do this for async await, where you have your async function. Let's just call this get. We're going to say result. Then we have await. And then you also have your JSON, where you also await the response.json. Nope, this should be small r. And now you can call get. And if you run get, oops, what's the problem? Sorry, not response, results. Then we can do console log JSON. Let's try this again. We get the same thing. This is using the regular promise handling, and this is using async await. And just the same way you would use this in normal JavaScript, well, you're also going to use this in React, because regardless of the framework you are using, you have to make network requests at some point to get data, to post data, to modify data. So it is really important that you get to understand how this promises works, how the fetch API works. And it doesn't have to be with fetch. There's also Axios, and there are also several tools you can use for network requests. The important idea is knowing how to resolve those network requests using promises or async await. I have a video on the fetch API, which I'm going to link in the video description. description. You can also check that out if interested. Now, coming to the last fundamental concept for this video, classes. Now, classes is something you would have really needed to understand before jumping into React, because previously in React, components were created in classes. They would look something like this. You have class, maybe button component. This is going to extend React component class. Here you have a bunch of methods like components, did, mount, and if you want to render, you have the render method. In this render method, you have your return, where you return your components. Yeah, you had stuff like this previously, but in the last couple of years, React has been moving towards functional components, and this is what you would see a lot when learning React. You won't be seeing classes like this. Instead, you'll be seeing things like functional components, where you use the function keyword. You don't really need to understand classes, although I'm currently working on a video where I explain how classes works in JavaScript, but this is not something you really need to know to jump into React, because you can already start using your function components to do other stuff. But if you'll still be interested in learning classes, you can check the video description. As soon as the video is published, I'm going to leave a link there. And that brings us to the end of this video, where we have seen 9 fundamental concepts which you need to know before jumping into React. Now, the reason why it's important to know this concept is that if you jump into React without this foundational knowledge, you might struggle. Your React journey might be rough, or sometimes you might misunderstand React. You would think something is a feature of React, whereas it's actually a feature of JavaScript. You would think an error is being thrown in your React component, when actually that error has nothing to do with React, but it has to do with your JavaScript code. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give this video a like and support by subscribing, by sharing, and I have more React related videos on my channel. You should see 1 or 2 of them currently on the screen. You can check out any of them.